The communities and the innovators that I've spoken to have pretty much universally had one thing in common, other than the desire to make the world a better place. It's the need for funding. In a world driven by a financial machine that demands the highest profits possible, regardless of the damage that does, communities and small ethical businesses can struggle to find that funding. And of course, that's where Ethex comes into this. And people like you, people who are willing to invest in projects that you know will make the world a better place to live in. Projects like the Hook Norton Community Land Trust, raising money to build community-led, permanently affordable homes that are energy efficient. And that's a model that solves so many of the problems we see related to housing in this country, just in one project. It's amazing. Businesses like Soul Farm in Cornwall, yes, Cornwall, I'm Cornish, who've raised funds to ensure the continued success of their regenerative farming enterprise that feeds hundreds of local families. And the Solar for Schools project that aims to help UK schools decarbonise and save money by installing solar panels and educating pupils on the sustainable energy transition. I mean, all of these are just so obviously the way forwards, right? Something I've learned in the process of making the Imagining Tomorrow podcast is that these community groups and small businesses can take a tiny little bit of seed funding, and then they start something that doesn't just solve one problem. It starts a ripple effect. Money is generated and stays within communities. One successful project creates enough trust and confidence in themselves for these groups to start other projects too. Physical and mental health improves. The very fabric of society is repaired by these tiny little stitches all over the country. And to extend the metaphor, investment like that which you provide is giving them the needle and thread to do this.
A few years ago, my path took me back to crossing over with an old colleague and friend, Kate Rayworth, who wrote a book called Doughnut Economics, 7 Ways to Think Like a 21st Century Economist. And it was based on this diagram. Now, if you can see, this diagram essentially has got 2 concentric circles. It's got an outer concentric circle, which is the planet's boundaries that Earth system scientists have told us we must not transgress, we must not overshoot. And it's got on the inside a social foundation that says we must meet the needs of everybody, the essential human needs that everybody has. And if you think of these 2 concentric circles as 2 boundaries, that our economy must not overshoot the ecological boundary on the outside, but nor fall short of the social foundation on the inside, you have a donut-shaped space, a green space between the 2 boundaries that becomes a safe and just space for humanity. It becomes a compass for our shared prosperity, for all life to thrive. And it becomes an alternative for how we think of economics, how we think of the world, and what we plan for. Suddenly, we're not just building economies that grow, whether or not they thrive, but instead growing economies that thrive rather than always grow. So you change the goals, you start to change deep design of the economy. But the reason this relates to Ethex's story is we've spent the last 2.5 years working with businesses and business leaders of all types, of all businesses from all sizes, all kinds of sectors, and around the world. So I've gone around the world for 2.5 years, basically doing workshops with small groups of business leaders, often CEOs or C-suite types that are struggling, that are saying to me, look, we know our business has to fundamentally transform, but we're held back. And time again, what they're held back from, whether it's a big company or a small enterprise or a family, medium-sized business, what they're held back by is their relationship with finance. Finance is demanding a particular return, a particular seat at the table, a particular set of parameters that holds back the kind of transition that will help humanity into the donut. And what that has taught me through all of that work is we've got to redesign finance and we've got to redesign business. Now, if I take it back to Ethex, I think what Ethex is doing, and has done so successfully in such a savvy way, is it has looked and found the sort of social enterprises, the kind of community-based organizations that need that financing, that embody a different paradigm at their very heart. And it has shaped its financial instruments accordingly. And I can't tell you how rare this is in the world of business and in the world of finance. There aren't that many Ethexes around. There aren't that many organizations that have been set up to ask themselves, how do I shape the financing to make it work for these mission-led, impact-oriented enterprises? Usually it's the other way around. How do they shape themselves to meet the needs of finance? And that paradigm shift is potentially disruptive to the whole economic debate and the whole economic arguments. When I look at the story of Ethex, one thing I noticed was it's not something that highlights a particular individual or a particular ego. And the story of Ethex is a story of collective action. And that itself is rare, even in the social enterprise movement, where you see a lot of stories based on very specific individuals. The fact that this isn't underlined, I think, tells a story about the ethos and the way it works. And I think it's a model that others are inspired from as well. So thank you. 10 years of impact is definitely something worth celebrating.
We've got 6 core funders who've really helped to drive Ethex over the 10 years. Esme Fairbairn, who really came in as the sort of founder organisation, along with Barrow Cadbury Trust, Tudor Trust, Lankelly Chase, Friends Provident Foundation, and then Big Society Capital. And between them, they've invested or supported us in grant form with £1.2 million. Not an insignificant amount of money, but when you think of what Ethex has turned over in 10 years, it's impressive what that has created. And actually 1.2, let's have another 1-2 number, 120, which you probably all know already. 120 million is the amount of funds that have been raised for projects around the country through Ethex, and what an amazing multiplier. 100 times the investment that's come in terms of the funding that's been generated.
There are few organisations I respect more than Ethex. They help community-owned and other social impact enterprises access finance. They are themselves a non-profit with purpose fully locked in, and they're savvy and practical. They do the hard work of actually channeling finance where it otherwise wouldn't go, all while fostering a narrative shift in the deep design of business and finance. It's a privilege to help them celebrate 10 years of impact. They are the real deal. So we've taken this 10-year moment to actually just reflect on our mission and our vision and what our focus is. And our vision is to shift the investment paradigm so money becomes a force for good. It's razor sharp. We think it's a big vision, but we think it needs to be done. We generally focus on 3 areas: fighting climate change, building more resilient communities, and creating a fairer society. But what's interesting about these 3 strands is they are so interconnected. You can't look at one without the other. They are absolutely essential to what we do, the types of organisations that we support, and what we project out to the world.
And when you realize there's so many diverse ways you can structure financing and enable entrepreneurs to develop and grow their businesses, you realize there's a disservice to them because the ecosystem isn't getting the right information. And as a result, you end up meeting some of these people 10 years down the line, and they're full of regret. They started off with these mission-led enterprises, and they're saying, well, in order to get the venture capital, there was a term sheet that came across, and I didn't know I could negotiate anything, and I ended up, having my business completely warped into something it never was meant to be. And it's there's some sort of semblance of a mission-led brand that's hung on to it, but really it's sort of a hollow shell of itself. So I think a big part of it is a sense of innovation of, look, we can do finance differently. There's a lot of, Silicon Valley types that are going to talk about venture capital, but hey, actually the interesting stuff is what you guys are doing, what sort of the impact first end of that impact investing spectrum is doing, and all the different diverse ways of structuring equity and debt to get the right kind of financing for businesses. And I think if we can get the sense of excitement around those diverse models, we can start to unlock some energy, we can start to get a bit more momentum towards them.
I think there is a huge gap between the intention and the desire to do something good and the knowledge of things being out there. If I can put on my ambassador hat for a moment and talk about how awesome MoneyMovers is. If you've not heard of it before, this is something that started as a Friends of the Earth Experiments team project. And they basically wanted to identify particular groups of people that would be able to help each other to move their investments from things that effectively power the fossil fuel industry and to shift those investments into ethical things. And this grew into the MoneyMovers project because they identified that women, they did lots of research, and women had much more urgency, a sense of urgency about needing to invest in better things. And also women were far more likely to be actually interested in what they were investing in and how ethical that was. Sorry to the chaps in the audience, but that's how it came out in the research. So what they've done is they're now collaborating with Huddlecraft, and this is a peer support model, and they basically train people who are hosts, and they lead very small groups, and we're talking 5 to 6 women and people of marginalised genders to get together and to look at their finances and to just support each other in shifting them from where they are now, perhaps a bank that is doing despicable things, to a bank that is not doing as despicable things or something else entirely. The thing that's really exciting about this is that the pilot project had 300 women take part. They shifted £1.9 million away from, okay, I'm going to go back into author mode, evil, and the perpetuation of evil to much better things, lovely, splendid, let's do more of that, thank you very much. 300 women. And so now they're scaling this up, and their aim is to make it 300,000 women globally to shift billions.
We is the word that we always hear. We need to get more greenwashing got rid of. But I've always been taught in work, we doesn't get you anywhere, it's I. So I am trying to be more analytical. I encourage you to be more analytical, and there is help on the way. You'll know that particularly the EU has been very strong on regulation that tightens and makes it harder for greenwashing to happen. But I'm sure we've all worked in companies where it's very tempting to slip something through, and your good side is telling you to advise your CEO or your finance director that this is really not a good thing to be doing. But there are others who are going, well, just we can get away with that. And it's I that needs to stand up and say, this is wrong. We shouldn't get away with this. Both as an employee, and it's a top-down thing. So there's quite a few top-downs in the room, I'm sure, who've got the opportunity to have direct influence on how things are reported. But then it's I as an individual who has to follow the lead of the women and Emma that Emma's working with, and be brave and call organisations out and move our money into good places. There's something broken when people can just cherry pick the good that they do
and avoid the transitionary things that are maybe going to require lower returns for a while and tolerate lower returns, or ones that you're going to need to be much more patient over the longer term in order to ride out that transition and the business is transformed into something else. So I think the answer is there are decent and good returns, as well as being able to facilitate the kind of ethical decision making in business. But if you want maximum returns, unfortunately, it's the big private equity firms that have made really bumper returns. It's the big venture capital firms who have, found the unicorns and squeezed startups dry to get them to grow as fast as possible and extract as quickly as possible. It's the fossil fuel giants that have produced amazing high returns. So unfortunately, I think there are trade-offs there, and there are tensions between the two. But I think the goal shouldn't be, how do I get maximum returns by doing good? It should be, how do I get sufficient returns while helping the kind of organizations that we need in our economy?
But actually, it's having conversations with councils and cities about their net zero strategies and how to embed community in those solutions. Because I think that could encompass quite a number of different sectors, actually, but it needs to be joined up and the community needs to be at the heart of it and having a real say. And a risk, I think, is that actually solutions are done too, instead of them being really creative and hand-in-hand solutions. So I think that's really an interesting place to watch and for us to try and engage with as much as possible.